It stands as a monument to human endurance, suffering, and the ultimate price of unchecked ambition. Welcome to Historical Moments, where we take you on a journey through time. Our channel is dedicated to bringing you fascinating stories, pivotal events, and unforgettable moments that have shaped our world. Whether it's a significant battle, a game-changing discovery, or a moment of triumph, we uncover the history that defines us. Subscribe and join us as we explore the past, one moment at a time. In the spring of 327 BC, Alexander the Great stood at the base of a towering rock formation in what is now modern-day Uzbekistan. Before him rose an impossibly steep cliff face stretching nearly 530 feet into the sky. At its peak sat a fortress that local inhabitants claimed was impregnable, the Sogdian Rock. The Macedonian army had been campaigning in Central Asia for 3 years, subduing the fierce resistance of local tribes. But here, in the land of the Sogdians, they faced a unique challenge. Local nobleman Oxyaartes and other rebel leaders had gathered their families and supplies atop this natural citadel, believing themselves safe from Alexander's reach. The defenders had good reason for their confidence. The fortress could only be accessed by a single narrow path, easily defended by just a handful of men. Sheer cliffs protected all other approaches. Food and water sources on the summit could sustain the inhabitants for months, if not years. When Alexander's envoys demanded their surrender, the Sogdians mockingly replied they would only yield to men with wings. This response sparked one of Alexander's most audacious military operations. The young king gathered his best climbers, 300 men who had experience scaling rocks in their mountainous homeland. He promised them substantial rewards, 12 talents to the first man to reach the top, 11 to the second, and so on down to the last climber. Using iron tent pegs and strong flaxen ropes, the climbers began their ascent in the dead of night. They chose the most difficult and dangerous face of the rock precisely because it would be the least guarded. Driving the pegs into cracks in the frozen soil and ice, they slowly made their way upward. The conditions were brutal. 30 men fell to their deaths in the darkness, their bodies lost in the deep snow below. But the others pressed on, using every handhold and crevice they could find. As dawn approached, they reached the summit, having achieved what the defenders thought impossible. As dawn approached, they reached the summit, having achieved what the defenders thought impossible. Alexander had instructed them to signal their success by waving pieces of linen. When the Sogdians awoke to find Macedonian soldiers above them, their shock was complete. Alexander seized this psychological advantage, having his herald announce to the defenders, "Behold, you now see that Alexander's men have wings."
Behold, you now see that Alexander's men have wings.
Among the captives was Roxana, daughter of Oxyaartes, whose legendary beauty would later capture Alexander's heart, leading to their marriage. But at this moment, she was simply one of many who watched in amazement as more Macedonian troops made their way up the cliff. The defenders' morale collapsed. Their impregnable fortress had been breached by what seemed like supernatural means. They surrendered to Alexander, who treated them with his characteristic mixture of severity and mercy. Oxyaartes himself would later become one of Alexander's trusted allies in Central Asia. The success of the operation hinged on the ingenious use of simple tools and extraordinary human courage. The iron pegs and ropes, basic as they were, allowed the climbers to create an improvised route up what had seemed an impossible cliff face. This combination of technical innovation and raw determination exemplified Alexander's approach to warfare. The capture of the Sogdian Rock wasn't just a remarkable feat of arms, it was a decisive psychological victory. Throughout Central Asia, word spread that no fortress, no matter how seemingly impregnable, could resist Alexander's army. Other strongholds surrendered without a fight, having heard how the men with wings had conquered the unconquerable. The story of the Sogdian Rock became legendary, recorded by ancient historians like Arrian and Quintus Curtius Rufus. It represented more than just military triumph. It showed how human ingenuity and courage could overcome seemingly impossible obstacles. The image of soldiers climbing through the night, risking death with every step, captured the imagination of generations. Modern archaeologists have identified several possible locations for the Sogdian Rock, with the most likely candidate being Komi Nor in Uzbekistan. The site still shows evidence of ancient fortifications, and its topography matches ancient descriptions. Standing at its base today, one can still appreciate the scale of Alexander's achievement. Standing at its base today, one can still appreciate the scale of Alexander's achievement. The tactics used at the Sogdian Rock would influence military thinking for centuries. The concept of attacking at the most difficult and least expected point would become a standard principle of warfare. Moreover, the psychological impact of achieving the impossible would be recognized as a powerful tool in military operations. As the sun sets behind the ancient cliffs, we're reminded that the Battle of the Sogdian Rock represents more than just another military victory. It stands as a testament to human determination, innovation, and the power of believing in the impossible. Alexander's winged soldiers proved that sometimes the most formidable barriers exist not in the physical world, but in our minds. In the end, the Sogdian Rock fell not to overwhelming force or sophisticated siege engines, but to the courage of a few hundred men who dared to climb into legend. Their ascent through the darkness became one of history's most dramatic examples of how ingenuity and bravery can overcome any obstacle, no matter how insurmountable it may seem. The cliffs still stand today, silent witnesses to that extraordinary night in 327 BC, when men truly learned to fly. Dawn breaks over the Hydaspes River in ancient Punjab. The year is 326 BC, and two great armies face each other across the swollen waters. On one bank stands Alexander the Great, the Macedonian conqueror who has never known defeat. On the opposite shore waits King Porus, the Indian ruler determined to defend his kingdom with an army of war elephants and fearless warriors. The monsoon season has turned the Hydaspes into a raging torrent. For weeks, Alexander's army has been unable to cross, while Porus's forces shadow their every move along the opposite bank. But Alexander is not called great without reason. Under the cover of darkness and storms, he devises an audacious plan. Leaving a portion of his army with campfires burning to deceive Porus, Alexander leads his elite units 17 miles upstream to a wooded bend in the river. As thunder masks the sound of their movements, his men use hide-covered rafts and local boats to cross the churning waters. But nature itself seems to challenge the Macedonian army. A flash flood nearly drowns hundreds of soldiers, and the landing point turns out to be not the mainland, but an island. With dawn approaching, Alexander's forces must make a second crossing. The weather clears just enough for them to reach the opposite shore, where they form their battle lines. Porus soon receives word of the crossing and races to meet this threat, leaving behind only a small force to watch Alexander's decoy camp. Armies that clash this morning could not be more different. Alexander's 40,000 men are professional soldiers, veterans of countless battles across Asia. Their tight phalanx formations bristle with long spears, while his companion cavalry represents the finest mounted warriors in the world. Facing them are Porus's 50,000 infantry, 4,000 cavalry, 300 war chariots, and most intimidating of all, 200 war elephants, massive beasts armored and ready for battle. Facing them are Porus's 50,000 infantry, 4,000 cavalry, 300 war chariots, and most intimidating of all, 200 war elephants, massive beasts armored and ready for battle. The fight begins with Alexander's cavalry charging Porus's left flank. The Indian king responds by sending his war elephants forward. These enormous creatures, each carrying armed warriors in wooden towers, crash toward the Macedonian lines. The battlefield trembles under their feet. Horses rear in terror, breaking formation. Macedonian infantry are trampled or impaled by the elephants' tusks. But Alexander has prepared for this. His light infantry dart between the elephants, cutting their leg tendons and attacking their handlers. Archers target the beasts' eyes and trunks. The wounded elephants panic, running amok through their own lines, crushing Indian soldiers beneath their feet. The carefully ordered Indian ranks begin to crack. Alexander seizes this moment. His companion cavalry sweeps around the chaos, striking the Indian army's exposed flanks. The Macedonian phalanx advances steadily, their wall of spears forcing back the Indian infantry. Porus fights on heroically from atop his own elephant, even as multiple wounds weaken him. The battle rages for 8 hours under the scorching Punjab sun. Finally, with thousands dead on both sides, the Indian army begins to collapse. Porus, still fighting despite his injuries, is captured. When brought before Alexander, he stands proud and tall, reportedly over 7 feet in height.
How do you wish to be treated? As a king?
Alexander, impressed by his enemy's courage and dignity, not only spares Porus but expands his kingdom. The Battle of Hydaspes marks the furthest east Alexander's empire will reach. His men, exhausted by years of campaigning and shaken by the ferocity of the battle, refuse to march further into India. The battle becomes legendary, remembered as a clash not just of armies, but of civilizations. It demonstrates both the might of Alexander's military machine and its limitations. The river crossing stands as one of history's great tactical achievements, while the elephant charge remains one of its most spectacular battlefield moments. As the sun sets over the blood-soaked battlefield, neither side could know that this engagement would mark a turning point in ancient history. Here, at the Hydaspes River, the unstoppable force of Hellenistic expansion finally met its limit against the equally formidable cultures of ancient India. The year is 326 BC, and the greatest army the world has ever known stands at the banks of the Hydaspes River in modern-day Punjab, India. 8 years of constant warfare have brought Alexander the Great's forces over 11,000 miles from Macedonia. But here, at this river's edge, something unprecedented is about to occur. The soldiers gather in small groups, their voices low but urgent. These men have followed Alexander through Persian deserts, over Afghan mountains, and across the mighty Indus. Their armor bears the scars of countless battles, their shields the dust of 3 continents. But now, their whispers carry a different tone, one of defiance. The monsoon season has been brutal. The monsoon season has been brutal. Disease has claimed hundreds. The army's horses are lame, their armor rusting in the relentless humidity. And ahead lies yet another river to cross, with rumors of massive armies waiting beyond, kingdoms with war elephants and countless soldiers. Alexander stands in his tent, poring over maps. He dreams of reaching the Eastern Ocean, of circumnavigating the world. But his men have reached their breaking point. Coenus, one of his most trusted generals, approaches with the news no one has ever dared deliver to Alexander. The army will not march further east.
Great king, I speak not for myself, but for your men. They are exhausted, their spirits are broken, they wish to see their homes again.
Alexander's initial reaction is predictable: rage. For 3 days, he confines himself to his tent, refusing to speak to anyone. The army remains camped by the river, the tension growing with each passing hour. These are men who have faced Persian immortals, scaled impossible walls, and crossed deadly deserts. But now they face their greatest challenge, standing up to the man they both love and fear. On the 4th day, Alexander emerges. He calls an assembly of all his troops. The soldiers gather, their faces set with determination. They have never refused their king before, but they know they cannot go on. Alexander's speech is passionate, reminding them of their glory, their conquests, the riches that lie ahead. But for the first time, his words fall on deaf ears. The soldiers stand silent.
We have followed you to the ends of the world, Alexander. We have given you everything. But even your men have their limits. Let those who wish to continue find fresh troops. Let us, who have given you the world, return to see our families before we die in these distant lands. We will return west.
This moment marks more than just the eastern limit of Alexander's empire. It represents a profound truth about leadership and human endurance. Even the mightiest army, led by the most charismatic commander in history, has its breaking point. The Hydaspes River becomes a symbol, not of defeat, but of the power of common soldiers to shape history. As the army breaks camp and turns westward, they carry with them a different kind of victory. They have conquered not another nation, but the will of Alexander himself. The mutiny at the Hydaspes River reminds us that even the greatest empires are built not just on the dreams of kings, but on the shoulders of ordinary men who must carry those dreams into reality. In the end, this river in India becomes the high water mark of Alexander's empire, a place where the unstoppable force of his ambition finally met the immovable object of human limitation. And perhaps, in yielding to his men's wishes, Alexander proved himself truly great by learning that sometimes the wisest thing a leader can do is listen to his followers. The year is 325 BC. Deep in what is now modern-day Pakistan, the greatest military commander of the ancient world faces one of his closest brushes with death. This is the story of Alexander the Great and the Battle of the Malians. After conquering Persia and pushing east into India, Alexander's Macedonian army had become an unstoppable force. But the long campaigns had taken their toll. His men were exhausted, homesick, and had recently refused to march further east beyond the Hydaspes River. Alexander, ever restless and seeking glory, turned his army south along the Indus River Valley to subjugate the local tribes. Among these tribes were the Malians, fierce warriors who had never submitted to foreign rule. They had retreated into their fortified cities, preparing for a desperate defense against the Macedonian war machine. Alexander, known for his aggressive tactics, decided to strike quickly before the Malians could unite with their allies. In a brilliant campaign of speed and surprise, Alexander divided his forces and attacked during the harsh Indian winter, when such military operations were considered impossible. The Malians were caught off guard, with many of their warriors scattered between various strongholds. But it was at their principal city where history would witness one of Alexander's most daring and nearly fatal moments. The Macedonians had breached the outer walls after a fierce fight, driving the defenders back into the citadel. Then, in a moment that would become legendary, Alexander grew impatient with the pace of the siege. Standing before the citadel walls, Alexander seized a ladder and began climbing, leading by example as he had done countless times before. Standing before the citadel walls, Alexander seized a ladder and began climbing, leading by example as he had done countless times before. Behind him, his officers rushed to follow. But as they climbed, the weight proved too much. The ladders began breaking. In an instant, Alexander made a decision that would nearly cost him his life. Rather than retreat down the failing ladder, he hurled himself over the wall into the citadel, directly into the midst of his enemies. Only 3 men managed to follow him before the ladders completely gave way. There stood Alexander the Great, conqueror of empires, with just 3 companions surrounded by Malian warriors. Drawing his sword, he fought with the courage and skill that had made him legendary. But the odds were overwhelming. A Malian archer took aim. The arrow, shot from point-blank range, pierced Alexander's breastplate and lodged in his lung. Blood poured from the wound, but Alexander fought on, his back against a tree, striking down any warrior who dared approach. His companions formed a desperate shield wall around their fallen king. Outside the walls, the Macedonian army had descended into near panic as word spread that Alexander had fallen. They began smashing through the walls with anything they could find, desperate to reach their leader. Finally, the Macedonians broke through. They found Alexander unconscious, the arrow still protruding from his chest. The Malian defenders were put to the sword as the enraged Macedonians took their revenge, believing their king was dead. But Alexander was not finished. For 6 days he lay near death as his physicians worked to save him. The arrow was removed, but the wound was grievous. His men gathered outside his tent, refusing to leave until they saw their king alive with their own eyes. On the 7th day, Alexander, though barely able to stand, ordered his bed to be carried to the river where his army's ships were anchored. As he came into view, the Macedonian army erupted in cheers that, according to ancient sources, were so loud they echoed off the nearby hills. The Battle of the Malians would become one of the most celebrated examples of Alexander's personal courage and one of history's great what-if moments. Had the arrow struck a few inches differently, had his companions not held off the defenders, had his army not reached him in time, the entire course of ancient history might have changed. The Malian campaign marked a turning point. Though Alexander recovered and the Malians eventually surrendered, the near-death experience sobered his troops. It was a stark reminder that their seemingly invincible king was mortal, after all. Within 2 years, Alexander would be dead in Babylon, leaving behind an empire that stretched from Greece to India. The battle stands as a testament to both Alexander's incredible personal bravery and his sometimes reckless nature. It reminds us that history often hangs by the thinnest of threads, in this case the flight of a single arrow that nearly changed the world. The ruins of the Malian city still exist today, near modern-day Multan in Pakistan. Though time has worn away the ancient walls, the echo of that fateful day remains, when Alexander the Great, the mighty king who had conquered most of the known world, nearly met his end at the hands of defenders whose names are lost to history. In the end, the Battle of the Malians serves as a powerful reminder that even the greatest figures in history were human, vulnerable to the same twists of fate that affect us all. Alexander's legendary status was built not just on his victories, but on moments like these, where raw courage and sheer will to survive transformed near disaster into the stuff of legend. This was not just another conquest in Alexander's remarkable career. It was a moment that revealed both the greatness and the mortality of one of history's most famous figures, a battle that nearly changed the course of ancient history with a single arrow's flight. Music fades to silence. 325 BC, one of history's greatest military commanders made a catastrophic error that would cost thousands of lives. After conquering much of the known world, Alexander the Great decided to lead his army through the Gedrosian Desert, a barren wasteland in modern-day southern Iran and Pakistan. Picture an endless sea of sand and rock stretching toward a merciless sun. 60,000 soldiers and camp followers, their armor glinting in the scorching light, march in long columns through terrain that seems designed to kill. The temperature soars above 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The few wells they find are brackish, the water more poison than sustenance. Day after day, the soldiers trudge forward. Day after day, the soldiers trudge forward. Their water supplies dwindle rapidly. The desert winds whip sand into their eyes, their throats, their lungs. At night, the temperature plummets, and the men shiver in their sweat-soaked clothes. But they must keep moving. Alexander had chosen this route partly out of pride, partly out of curiosity. The great Persian king Cyrus had once attempted this same crossing, losing his entire army in the process. Surely, Alexander thought, he could succeed where others had failed. As supplies ran low, the army began to abandon their precious cargo. Valuable Persian treasures, weapons, and provisions were left scattered across the desert floor. Men began to slaughter their pack animals for food, but even this desperate measure provided little relief. The meat, corrupted by exhaustion and dehydration, only made them sicker. The desert showed no mercy. The desert showed no mercy. Those who fell behind were left to die. Soldiers would collapse from heat exhaustion, their bodies too weak to continue. Others went mad from thirst, drinking seawater from the coastal inlets they occasionally encountered, a fatal mistake that only hastened their deaths. Alexander himself suffered alongside his men. Though he had opportunities to ride in relative comfort, he often walked to show solidarity with his troops. When precious water was found, legend says he poured his portion into the sand, refusing to drink, while his men went thirsty. When precious water was found, legend says he poured his portion into the sand, refusing to drink, while his men went thirsty. The horror of the march took on nightmarish proportions. Guides lost their way in sandstorms. Entire units disappeared into the desert's vast emptiness. The army's women and children suffered terribly, with many dying where they fell. The desert floor became a trail of abandoned equipment, corpses, and broken dreams. After 60 days of this hellish march, the survivors finally reached Pura, the capital of Gedrosia. What was left of Alexander's mighty army was a shadow of its former self. Historical accounts suggest that 3/4 of his force perished in the desert, as many as 45,000 souls lost to heat, thirst, and exhaustion. The Gedrosian Desert March stands as one of history's most costly military misadventures. It demonstrated that even the greatest commanders can fall victim to hubris, and that nature remains an undefeated adversary. The desert had accomplished what no human army could. It had brought Alexander's forces to their knees. This catastrophic march would haunt Alexander for the remainder of his short life. While he would continue his campaigns, the loss of so many loyal soldiers, men who had followed him to the edges of the known world, weighed heavily on his conscience. The Gedrosian Desert remains largely as inhospitable today as it was over 2 millennia ago. Its shifting sands still hide the bones of Alexander's lost army, a testament to the fine line between ambition and folly, between greatness and disaster. The march through the Gedrosian Desert serves as a stark reminder that even history's greatest figures are not immune to catastrophic miscalculation. It stands as a monument to human endurance, suffering, and the ultimate price of unchecked ambition. Thank you for watching Historical Moments. We hope you enjoyed this trip through history. If you liked the video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible stories from the past. Until next time, keep exploring the moments that changed history.